right, so we're diving deep today. Ready? Buckle up, because we are heading into a world where feelings, like seriously big feelings, are the name of the game. And nature? Oh, nature is like the ultimate muse.
Sounds intense.
It is. We're talking French Romanticism, but, it's not all just love poems and dramatic pronouncements. There's uh, a lot more to it.
Yeah, there's a lot going on under the surface.
Exactly. So today we're going to, try to unpack all of that. We'll explore the historical context, the key players, the whole shebang.
And hopefully understand why it still matters today.
Exactly. So to set the stage, French Romanticism was this huge cultural movement that really took off in like the 1800s. And it was a reaction to, what came before, right? Like the Enlightenment with its emphasis on reason and logic.
Yeah, the Romantics were like, hold on a second. What about feelings? What about intuition? What about the power of the individual? They were all about embracing the subjective experience, the emotional side of life.
So a swing from head to heart.
Exactly. And this shift played out in literature, art, music. I mean, you name it. It was a full-blown cultural phenomenon.
Wow. Okay. So to help us really get into all of this, we're going to focus on three figures who I think really embody French Romanticism: Victor Hugo, Alphonse de Lamartine, and George Sand.
All absolute giants of the movement, each with their unique style, but all exploring similar themes of love, nature, and yeah, those big dramatic emotions we talked about.
So where do we even begin? I guess let's start with Victor Hugo, the author of Les Miserables. I mean, come on, that book is like epic. And it's still super popular today,
Yeah.
They even made it into a musical.
Right. Well, I think part of Hugo's enduring appeal is his ability to tell these really compelling stories about ordinary people caught up in extraordinary circumstances. Like, he doesn't shy away from the darker side of life, poverty, injustice, the struggles of the working class.
Yeah, Les Mis is like a social commentary disguised as a page-turner. And his characters are so, well, memorable. I mean, who can forget Jean Valjean or Cosette? Or Javert, for that matter.
Yeah, they are unforgettable. And I think another thing that makes Hugo so powerful is his use of language. He was a master of creating these incredibly vivid images and scenes with his words. Like, you can practically feel the desperation of the poor, the grandeur of Notre Dame Cathedral.
Yeah.
He really transports you to another time and place.
Totally. It's like you're right there in 19th century France.
Yeah.
So that's Hugo. Now, what about Alphonse de Lamartine? His poetry is, well, a little different from Hugo's novels, right?
Definitely. Lamartine was all about capturing those deeply personal, melancholic emotions that I think were also a big part of Romanticism.
Yeah, his poem Le Lac comes to mind. It's so beautiful, but, oh, so sad.
It really is. And it's a great example of how the Romantics used nature to reflect human emotion. Lamartine wrote that poem after visiting a lake where he'd spent time with a woman he loved, but she died. And the poem is full of these images of the lake's beauty, but also this overwhelming sense of loss and the passage of time.
It's like nature becomes this mirror for his own grief.
Exactly. And you see that a lot in Romantic poetry. Nature is not just a pretty backdrop. It's a source of inspiration, a reflection of the soul, It's almost like a character in itself.
That's like so deep. Okay, now we've got Victor Hugo with his epic storytelling and Lamartine with his melancholic poetry. So where does George Sand fit into all this?
Well, Sand, she was a force to be reckoned with. She was a woman who was writing under a male pseudonym in a time when that was pretty much unheard of. And she was tackling themes that were, let's just say, controversial.
Right, like women's rights and sexuality and all those taboo topics.
Exactly. Yeah. Her novels like Indiana and Lelia explore the complexities of women's lives and their desires and how they navigate a society that often, tries to suppress them. And she was a fierce advocate for social equality.
She sounds pretty badass.
Oh, she absolutely was. And I think her work still resonates today because she was talking about things that are unfortunately still relevant.
It's amazing, isn't it, how these works written centuries ago can still speak to us today.
It really is. And I think that's a testament to the power of, well, the themes that the Romantics were exploring. They were grappling with universal human questions: love, loss, identity, the search for meaning. Those are things that we all struggle with.
It's true. Although I have to admit, sometimes, reading these romantic works, it's all so, like, full on. The emotions are so intense. All the tragic love stories and, sometimes it feels a bit much.
Well, yeah, they weren't afraid of a little drama. I mean, that's part of what makes it so compelling. They were embracing the full spectrum of human experience, the good, the bad, and the really, really dramatic.
I get that. It's just, like, sometimes I need a break from all the angst.
I hear you. But I think it's important to remember that they were also reacting against the cold, hard rationality of the Enlightenment. They wanted to explore the irrational, the emotional, the intuitive.
So it's all about balance.
In a way, yes. They were trying to restore balance to a world that they felt had become too focused on the head and not enough on the heart.
Makes sense. All right, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about Victor Hugo, Alphonse de Lamartine, George Sand, and their unique contributions to French Romanticism. But, for our listeners who maybe aren't as familiar with this movement, like, what's the key takeaway? What's the one thing you want them to remember?
I think the most important thing is to remember that the Romantics were really trying to expand our understanding of what it means to be human. They were saying that emotions, intuition, and individual experience are just as important as reason and logic. And I think that's a message that's still really relevant today.
Totally. Especially in a world that can feel, increasingly driven by technology and data.
Yeah.
It's like sometimes we forget to just, feel.
Right. It's like they're reminding us to connect with our hearts, with nature, with the things that make us feel alive.
Well said. And on that note, I think it's time for us to wrap up this deep dive. But before we go, I have one last question for our listeners. Think about those romantic themes we've been discussing today. The longing for connection, the power of nature, the intensity of emotion, the belief in the individual. Do you see those themes reflected in our world today? Are we all maybe just a little bit romantic at heart? Something to ponder.
Definitely food for thought.
Until next time.